not to skip your gym day. Now, obviously, if you've got a fever, the flu, the measles or something, stay home. But if it's just like, I just feel gross today and I don't want to work out, it's like, working out might actually increase blood flow to your tissues, might help to deliver white blood cells a little bit faster, so you might be able to fight off that little pathogen. So just a cold, you may not want to skip the workout because it changes circulation and delivers those white blood cells maybe to where those pathogens might be lurking. After a cold bath, because when it gets really cold, your blood is going to kind of pool towards your organs to keep your organs warm. So that's going to change blood circulation. And again, this is one of the reasons why you do the alternating cold bath, hot baths with certain sports. That's to change blood flow to the area, including the white blood cells to fight off infections or injuries that might have happened, and the red blood cells to deliver nutrients, oxygen, that kind of scenario. During digestion, just like a cold bath, everything's going to come to the digestive system to absorb nutrients, as well as make sure the things that are in the digestive system stay in the digestive system. They don't invade the body. So that's going to shift things. Pregnancy, that just screws up everything. Okay, so obviously, if you have high white blood cell counts when you're pregnant, your doctor's not going to be like, let's get antibiotics to get rid of that thing, because most people want to keep them until they pop out. That one is just something you have to deal with. Persistent leukocytosis, the person that's been tested, we know they're not pregnant, they didn't get tested while they're digesting or during cold baths or anything like that, then that might be that indicator of a pathogen is lurking around somewhere. And that's where we go and see which white blood cell is spiked. Is it a bacteria that because the neutrophils are fighting it off? Is it chicken pox because the basophils are fighting it off? Is it eosinophils for fighting off a worm or anything like that? So then they will look specifically at who is spiking in numbers. So we often see these, again, acute infections like pneumonia, appendicitis, and so forth. Thrombocytosis, increase in thrombocytes, so you would have increased clotting issues, as well as a little bit thicker viscosity in the blood. Thrombocytopenia, opposite, not enough thrombocytes, so you wouldn't be able to clot as efficiently. Hemophilia, this is a hereditary disorder. Most types of hemophilia are sex-linked recessive. So males are usually the ones that get the hemophilia versus the female. So again, the hemophilic gene, the defect is on the X. So when the guy has X and Y, Y from dad doesn't matter, but the X again is what you're going to express, so you get hemophilia. If you're a girl, you have to have the defective X from mom and the defective X from dad, which is really hard to do because back in the day, males died, usually fairly early, so they didn't have time to reproduce, so it was very rare to have a female with hemophilia. Now, of course, guys tend to die young because little boys do stupid stuff like jumping off of things and running into traffic, and boys stuff. So an injury could end up with a fatality unless they were just, kept on a shelf like a porcelain doll throughout their lifetime. Girls usually don't survive past puberty. So guess why girls don't survive past puberty with hemophilia?
Pregnancy.
Not pregnancy.
Birth?
No. Period. They'll start a period and not stop because they'll just bleed internally until they run out. Sucks to be a girl. So the guys can be okay as long as you don't let them play outside. But the girls are like, and you are going to die. Okay. Usually with severe hemophilia, they're put on hormone treatments nowadays to suppress periods. And of course, there's a lot of medications and stuff to help out transfusions. Because of hemophilia, this is why we have a lot of our rules and regulations with blood transfusions and stuff like that. Back in the day, 70s and 80s, anybody could donate blood. You just walk in, give a pint, get some money, that kind of scenario. And then we had Brian White. Y'all remember Brian White?
No.
Oh, you guys are young. All right, kids of the 80s had to watch the Brian White story. So Brian White was a little boy that had hemophilia. And again, one of the major ways that they treat hemophilia is just give you whole blood. Because if they give you a blood transfusion, you get all the clotting factors you need and you can survive. So kids with hemophilia usually have to get a blood transfusion oftentimes once a month, maybe more frequently, depending on what's going on in their life. Now, in the 80s, they didn't test blood that was donated. So Brian White contracted HIV through a blood transfusion through the hospital. And of course, that was bad. If it was today, they would have sued the pants off of the hospital for that kind of crap. But of course, Brian White got HIV in the 80s, which means he was going to die because HIV used to kill you, right? We didn't have all the medications that keep you alive, which is why Magic Johnson is still here. Sorry, I'm a little angry. I have a Magic Johnson, the Olympic card from when they were part of the Dream Team. And it's like, I'm going to be rich. He's going to die. And I can sell the card. Dude's still alive. Card's worth crap. It's like, man, there goes my retirement plan right there. It's like, die already. I'm sure a lot of his teammates thought the same thing. Okay, in case you didn't know, Magic Johnson's part of his magic was being frisky with all the teammates' wives. So when it came out that he had HIV, everyone was like, now I gotta check my woman because the magic was here, and now we gotta see if he spread the magic to everybody. So, and nobody wanted to play with him because cooties. Okay. But anywho, in the 80s, when you got AIDS, you died. You usually died within a few weeks to a couple of years before we started coming up with medications and help treat and all that kind of scenario. So of course, Brian White died, and the movie kind of centered around the fact that back in the day, in the 80s, if you had HIV, if you had AIDS, you were gay and you were horrible. It was like, it's an 8-year-old boy. So this poor 8-year-old boy was dying of AIDS and being teased at school and being bullied by adults and all this. And like, you're a queer fag and that's why you're going to die. And you're like, he's 8. Come on now. It's not like he was hopping at the bars, picking up dudes. He was 8. It's just not something they did back in the day. Well, legally anyway. But anywho, because of Brian White, because of that big issue, now we have all those regulations. You cannot donate blood if you've had a piercing or a tattoo within the last 6 months. You cannot donate blood if you've ever received blood in a foreign country because we don't know their records, that kind of scenario. So we have a lot more regulations for donating blood. That's why they have to test you for certain things before donating, because nowadays they don't want to kill people that they're trying to save. So big hoo-ha, big movie that everybody in the 80s had to watch so we could all learn about the dangers of HIV and picking on 8-year-olds who were dying, that kind of scenario. So, hemophilia, have that. This is also the reason why Rasputin became so popular. Remember Rasputin? You crazy guy in Russia. So back in the day when they still had czars, the last little Alexander had hemophilia, so they brought in Rasputin to try to cast spells to save him, and it didn't work. Right? And then they didn't like Rasputin, so they shot him and hung him and drowned him and poisoned him. And eventually they think he died.
Good
Lord. They were a little paranoid back then. It's okay. All of them died anyway because then they had the revolution that killed off the entire royal family, right? Including Anastasia, no matter what the movie tells you. Crazy Russians. This is why you don't let people inbreed. Yeah, inbreeding. This is what caused World War I, right?
No.
The king of England, the king of Russia, and the king of Germany were all cousins, and they had a family fight, and it started World War I.
Wow.
And we all had to deal with it.
Wow.
Freaking royal people and their inbreeding.
Good Lord.
Don't inbreed. Other than diseases, ugly children. Look at Charles.
Queen Elizabeth has those weird moles all over her.
No, she did.
Or yeah, she did now.
Yeah, she's been dead for a while. It's okay.
Wow.
Nobody really noticed.
Did
Because Charles doesn't do anything but just hobble around with his hooker. Anywho, any questions about blood? Because my opinions of the royal family and World War II history is not on any test, I think. Oh, yeah, we've got rules for bonuses. I'm not allowed to ask questions that aren't in subject-specific content.
Oh.
It wasn't because of me. Other people were just randomly asking.
I mean, technically, inbreeding has to do with the blood.
Does technically, yeah, hemophilia is caused by inbreeding, so I could work it in. Like, what? What about banjos? So, no blood question. All right, moving on to the heart, which looks vaguely familiar because it's almost like we've seen it somewhere before. I know, too soon. Oh, look at that. There's a heart. So this is what it looks like when they transplant a heart. So again, it's not like the movies where they have an ice pack and a little igloo cooler that they're hauling it around like somebody's lunch. It's sitting in a nice little hammock, and they give it a little bag of blood so it has something to do in there. It's kind of like, bringing coloring books for your kids at the restaurant. And the heart is contracting the entire time because if the heart stops beating, it dies. Nobody wants a dead heart. So it actually will continue to beat. The heart will continue to beat as long as you give it oxygen and nutrients, okay, and make sure that it doesn't get an infection. So it can beat on its own for quite a little while. So that's one of the very few things that is biologically accurate in certain scary movies or action movies where they rip the heart out and it keeps beating. Only thing accurate in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Everything else is tragically not accurate at all.
Dang it, not the crystal skull.
Okay, that one definitely isn't accurate, but you can't cut open a python and garter snakes come out. Alligators don't live in India to eat the dude. Should have been gargoyles. Here's a scan. Look at that. It's hard. And she looks thrilled that she came into work today to save somebody's life. So anywho, when you get an artificial heart, this is what it looks like. It's just basically the valves and the pumping motors and the tubes that connect everybody.
Oh, wow.
So again, when we have the circulatory system, the cardiovascular system, we've got the heart. And of course, the heart can pump to the lungs to drop off carbon dioxide and pick up oxygen. That's your pulmonary circuit. And then we pump to the body. So we pump oxygen to the body and pick up carbon dioxide, returning to the heart. So that's the systemic. So practical 1 content and then practical 2 content. And of course, it's those blood vessels that are delivering the oxygen and nutrients to tissues and taking away waste and carbon dioxide. So the location of the heart, oh my gosh, it's like we're having a flashback for the first question on the back side of the practical.
Location of the
I know,
heart
too
is
soon. All right, the anterior inferior mediastinum. Okay, so the mediastinal cavity is in the middle of the thoracic cavity. And of course, it is going to be a little bit forward and a little bit down low within that mediastinal cavity. 2/3 of it is left of the midline, so it does start off under the sternum because that's the most solid part of the rib cage, so very, very protective. Its base, the wide end of the heart, is going to be just below the second rib, directed towards the right shoulder. The apex, the pointy end of the heart, because it's like an upside down pyramid, if you use your imagination. It's going to be between, on the 5th intercostal rib, so between rib 5 and rib 6, directed towards the left hip. And again, it is about 7 to 9 centimeters or 2.5 to 3.5 inches left of the midline. And it does sit on the diaphragm. So when we look at the heart, it's not straight up and down. It's got its gangster tilt a little bit in the body. And of course, sitting on the diaphragm, it moves every time you breathe in and out. So it rides the diaphragm like a little horse its entire life. Okay, so it doesn't just sit still. It's constantly being pushed up and down as we breathe up, in and out.
Does that help with the contractions? Or with the, no?
There it is, in case you want to stab somebody, if they're a vampire. So again, most vampire movies are not biologically accurate because you always see them stab over here. They're like, good job, you got a lung and a nipple. That's all you're going to get. You got to have a little bit more midline to get to that part. Yeah, so here's like, it's nice. They even gave him hair, like on his tummy and everything. They're in it. Oh, there's an x-ray. So there's our apex, there's the left margin, there's the right margin on hey, and the inferior margin sitting on top of the diaphragm. And that's what it looks like when you open up somebody, sitting there, hanging out. And I should just take that picture out because we've seen enough of the heart already. All right, the heart anatomy, its size is roughly the fist of its owner. So it's not like, your heart's the size of giant hands over there. Your heart matches your body. So it's going to be a different size depending on if you're a small person or a big person. At birth, it's basically a cube. It's 1 inch wide by 1 inch deep by 1 inch in length. And it's about 0.75 ounces or 20 grams. By the time we get adulthood, it is going to, again, kind of elongate a little bit, get more heart-shaped. It's going to be 5 inches long by 3.5 inches wide by 2 inches deep, roughly. And it's going to be about 11 ounces. So you take your can of Coke, take a drink, put it down. That's how much your heart weighs, or 300 grams. Okay. Your atria, again, atria is plural, atrium is single. The job of the atria is to collect. So the right atria is collecting blood from the systemic circuit. The left atria is collecting blood from the pulmonary circuit. And each of the atria are going to have that auricle. Again, auricle is Latin for triangular flap or ear flap, so that's why it's called the same thing as your ear. So this little appendage, whenever we have normal blood pressure, is kind of flapped over on the front of the atria. If we get too much blood volume, we get too much blood pressure, the atria have to expand because of that, and they go from being sad puppy ears to being happy puppy ears, right? So baby German Shepherds versus adult German Shepherds. So that's where our A&P hormone is going to come from, that atrial natriuretic peptide. So whenever the auricles get stretched, they don't like that. They want to be flappy. So when they get stretched, they're going to release A&P, which hopefully makes you pee, hopefully lowers your blood pressure, so they can go back to sad puppy position. Okay, so that's just basically a relief valve if we have excess of blood. The ventricles, the job of the ventricles is to pump blood out of the heart. So again, the right ventricle is going to pump to the pulmonary circuit. The left ventricle is going to pump to the systemic circuit. So that's why the left side has to be so much bigger than the right, because the systemic includes against gravity to the top of your head all the way to your toes, where the pulmonary just goes to the lung and back. So really quick trip right there. So it's going to be a little bit thinner. When we look at it in position in the body, again, because of the gangster tilt, the right ventricle is going to be sitting on the diaphragm. The left one's going to be a little bit more towards the back side of it. Our partitions, we do have an interatrial septum to separate the atria from each other, but because those big vessels are coming in and out, the ascending aorta, the pulmonary trunk, they kind of go through that, so the interatrial septum isn't as obvious as the intraventricular. It kind of bobs and weaves around those big blood vessels. The intraventricular septum, that's that big boy between the left and the right ventricles, that one is going to again separate those guys. So we can have 4 chambers completely separated from each other. So again, something that we see in mammals, in birds, in crocodilians. So reptiles have just 3 chambers. Their ventricle takes turns which side they're pumping for. And fish only have 2. Fish be weird. So there's in position in the body. So the right atrium is more forward. The left one's in the back going, hey. The right ventricle, again, more forward. The left one's in the back side. Chopping them so we can see. Right atrium, left atrium, right ventricle thin-walled, left ventricle thick-walled. And here we can see the intraventricular septum really well. And then the interatrial septum kind of bobs and weaves around those blood vessels. Probably why it was a little difficult to find those little buggers on Victor the other day. It's like, coverings of the heart. So we've got wrappings upon wrappings upon wrappings to separate the heart from the rest of the organ systems. And that's to protect it. You don't want to get the flu or pneumonia and it spread to your heart because they're just next door to each other. So we don't want to have to worry about it. So we're going to have the pericardium. So that covering around the outside of the heart. It covers the majority of the anterior surface and about half of the posterior surface. So the picture kind of shows you, you can imagine if your fist was your heart and the wrist and the arm were the big vessels. If you were to punch a balloon, because apparently the balloon looked at you funny, that balloon would cover your fist, but not the wrist area because of those blood vessels coming in and out. So it's going to cover around the front, but where we have the aorta and the pulmonary trunk and those guys popping out, we're not going to be covered by pericardium. Now we have 3 different layers of pericardium, which is why pericardium alone wasn't enough on a practical. So our fibrous pericardium, dense, irregular connective tissue. This is a bag surrounding the outside of the heart. It's kind of like a brown paper sack. When it's in place, you can't see the details of the heart. You can't see the auricles. You can't see the blood vessels on the heart or the fat on the heart, anything like that. Just like when you put a beverage in a brown paper sack, you can't tell what your beverage happens to be. That's going to help protect. That way the heart doesn't beat so much that it shifts position in the chest or anything like that. The serous pericardium, again, our serous pericardium, we even learned about in A&P1 way back on chapter 1 in the lab book. Remember chapter 1 in A&P1 when you had hopes and dreams and happiness? That's gone now. But again, we've got those serous membranes, the bag covering the lungs, the bag covering the heart, the bag covering the digestive system. Guess what we're going to keep talking about in A&P2? Bag covering the heart, bag covering the lungs, bag covering the digestive system. So heart time. So again, we've got the serous pericardium. It is going to be made out of mesothelium. And again, mesothelium is simple squamous epithelium of the serous membranes. We're going to have that double bag, that double layer. The parietal layer is on the outside. So it is going to have the job of anchoring the serous membranes in place. So it's actually going to adhere to the inside of the fibrous pericardium. So if you were to look at the fibrous pericardium, the inside would have kind of like this sheen, and that sheen would be that mesothelium. So you can't take it off without scraping, and obviously that would cause damage. So if you were to remove the heart from the chest, the fibrous pericardium, the parietal pericardium would stay with the chest cavity. The visceral pericardium or the epicardium, interchangeable, that is the simple squamous epithelium adhering to the heart itself. So when the heart comes out, you would have that epicardium, which is that outer layer around the outside of the heart. I know, too soon. Okay. So that little guy, between those, the epicardium or visceral pericardium and the parietal pericardium, you're going to have that pericardial cavity. And again, that pericardial cavity is filled with transitate or serous fluid. Oftentimes we just call it pericardial fluid because we be fancy and it's the heart, so pericardial fluid. So pericardial cavity between the two layers filled with our pericardial fluid. It only has about 30 milliliters. Okay, that's not a whole lot. Again, a milliliter is basically a drop out of an eyedropper, so like 30 drops of fluid, just enough to have a friction-free environment. Just like oil is going to make sure your pistons don't seize up in your engine. I think that's what oil goes to in the engine.
Right.
Something. Every now and then I watch those commercials during oil changes, and like, you know, what kind of oil you have? It's like, no, I don't. So it's one of those things, just enough so when the heart is beating, it doesn't rub around on those membranes, because rubbing creates friction and friction makes things stop, and we don't want the heart to stop beating. So it's just enough to keep it going. Now pericarditis, this is when we have inflammation of the pericardium, so itis, inflammation. So this inflammation can lead to a buildup of fluid. So this inflammation can be caused because of a pathogen. You can have bacterial pericarditis, viral pericarditis, fungal pericarditis. Those ones can be major problems because you have to treat that disease, that pathogen, before it can kill you. You can also have issues with pericarditis if you've had any kind of chest surgery and you might have nicked or bumped into the pericardium and it gets irritated and produces a lot of fluid because you touched it. Very sensitive. Even a hit to the chest can cause irritation of this membrane. So anything that irritates it, it's going to make more fluid to try to wash away the irritation. The problem is this cavity is only so big. It's only made to house 30 milliliters. So if you get irritated and you produce excessive fluid and you're up to 50, you've almost doubled that fluid, but the space hasn't changed. We can't expand out because we have the fibrous pericardium whose job is to prevent it from expanding out. So all we can do is expand in. And of course, when we expand in, we cause that compression. And that compression can lead to that secondary condition, that cardiac tamponade. So you can have pericarditis without cardiac tamponade. But usually this is the one that we pick up, that we feel. It feels like a heart attack. So severe chest pressure and pain. So a lot of times patients are like, I think I'm having a heart attack. They go in, they're like, it's just pericarditis, we'll fix that. So it's your heart being crushed. And of course, if you continue to crush your heart, eventually your heart will stop. So pericarditis can lead to a fatality if we don't treat it. So we have to extract the fluid, drain the fluid, fix the irritation so the fluid doesn't keep building up. We could also end up with pericarditis, not because of that irritation causing excessive fluid buildup, but if we have a hole in the pericardium and that fluid leaks out and the membranes rub on each other, then they get irritated as well because now they're touching each other, and that can be very painful and cause friction. So in that case, that form of pericarditis will cause chest pains, but it doesn't cause cardiac tamponade because we don't have any pressure fluid buildup because that fluid is leaking out somewhere. And so you got to patch your hole and fill the fluid like it's supposed to. So such a prissy little membrane. It's like too much, it irritates. Too little, it's irritated. Just irritated. There is our pericardium. So when the fibrous pericardium is in place, we can't see any of the details of the great vessels coming in. We can't see the fat deposits or the blood vessels or auricles or anything. Once we remove it, pretend it's not neon green, but we can now see the bases of those major vessels. We can see the auricle of the right atria, the left one's kind of peeking over there. And you can still see the little cavity. There's a cavity between the fibrous pericardium that has the parietal serous pericardium adhering to it. And then, of course, the epicardium attaching to the heart muscle. Looking at the heart like we saw it in a bucket. So again, we have that epicardium or visceral pericardium, that thin, transparent, simple squamous epithelium adhering to the outside of the heart. It will often have fat deposits. These fat deposits are normal and necessary. These fat deposits are going to form packing peanuts around those big vessels, the coronary circulation, to help protect those vessels. It also helps protect the heart and act as a nutrient source if we need to get to it. Then we have the myocardium. Again, myo means muscle, so this is our cardiac muscle. And again, as we learned in A&P1, cardiac muscle has branching muscle cells that allow us to pump versus pull or peristaltic activity that we see in smooth or skeletal muscle. Now, with the cardiac muscle, there's obviously no skeleton to the heart or anything like that. So in order to support that muscle as it's contracting, it kind of wraps around itself. There are thickened areas around that muscle where we have chunks of connective tissue. So deep within, you have a connective tissue skeleton. It's not a bony skeleton, it's just extra fibrous tissue. And again, this is why if people eat heart, they often describe it as very chewy, very hard. You can only eat it medium rare or it gets too tough. And that's because of the connective tissue the muscle is using as an anchor point. So we always have to have some kind of anchor for muscle, whether it's bone that we saw with skeletal muscle, or in the case of cardiac and smooth muscle, it's connective tissues, which is why they eat and cook very differently because of that support system built into them. They'll have extra connective tissue to help separate the chambers, so the interventricular septum and the interatrial septum will have thicker connective tissue. Also at the base of each of the valves to help support the valves, because valves are very thin and flappy. They're just made out of endothelium. So we need a support so you don't blow out one of those things, because that's going to be problematic. Our myocardium, obviously much thicker in the ventricles because they need more muscle to pump blood up and out of the heart, where the atria just have to go straight down, so they don't require a lot. Because we have excessive muscle in the ventricles, they're going to have these reinforced muscular ridges associated with them. And these muscular ridges are called the trabeculae cardi. And again, trabeculae means lattice, and carne means meat. So a meat lattice. Sounds like something you get at the fair. I like trabeculae cardi, extra queso, please. But it's one of those things, it's just meat ridges. And you might have noticed that in the sheep. It looks kind of ribby and bumpy lumpy. Up from the apex to squeeze the heart, so the blood goes up and out through the top, or the base of the heart. This is the same scenario, they just kind of color coded it so you can see those different layers of the heart. So external anatomy, of course, we've got little dents, the sulci that the blood vessels sit into, so they don't sit on top of the heart. They're kind of nestled in to help protect them a little bit. So we'll have a dent in the front where the anterior interventricular artery will be and the great cardiac vein will be. We have the coronary sulcus that has the coronary sinus and the major parts of the right and left coronary arteries. We have the posterior interventricular sulcus that would have the posterior interventricular artery and the middle cardiac vein sitting in it. And there's the rest of the coronary sulcus wrapping around. So that is basically a big dent that separates the atria from the ventricles, kind of like a waistband around the heart. Oh my gosh, it's like we've seen this somewhere before. Ooh, All right. Blood flow to the heart. So I didn't show you the video in lab, but there's a video in the extra website things where it's the St. Joseph commercial, because it actually has the guy with the banjo singing about blood flowing through the heart. So it's an educational commercial. It originally was on Happy Days. Look that one up. All right, so again, we start with the atria receiving blood from the systemic circuit, the superior and the inferior vena cava. The blood goes from the right atria through the tricuspid valve that has its chordae tendineae, its heartstrings, attaching it to the papillary muscle. That's so the papillary muscle will contract slightly before the rest of the ventricle, pull in the chordae tendineae, slamming shut the AV valve, so tricuspid or the bicuspid valve, so we don't get backwash into the atria, because backwash is bad. So through that tricuspid valve, we end up in the right ventricle, that is thinner, and that right ventricle will push through the pulmonary semilunar valve to the pulmonary trunk, to the right and left pulmonary arteries, lobar arteries, lungs, lobar veins, pulmonary veins, back to the left atria, from the left atria through the bicuspid or mitral valve into the left ventricle, which is thicker, and the left ventricle is going to pump it out through the aortic semilunar valve to the ascending aortic arch, descending thoracic aorta, and to the rest of the system. Oh my gosh, there it is with arrows. Okay, so again, we come in this way, we go through there, we shoot back to the lungs, we come back, we go through there, we shoot to the body. Okay. Heart sounds. Everybody knows your heart makes noises, right? That's one of the first things little kids notice that's why they go to sleep and they're on your chest. Your heartbeat puts them to sleep. Isn't that fun? Don't have an anxiety attack when you have a kid, because they're like, what's wrong with your beat? It's horrible. Right, so we have heart sounds that we listen to. Now, listening to body sounds is called acoustillation. So again, if you've had kids, you've taken them to the pediatrician, they listen to their heart, they listen to their lungs, they listen to their tummies, that kind of scenario to make sure everything's working. When you go to the adult doctor, they don't care about your tummy anymore. Right? They don't listen to your tummy gurgle. I guess that's okay. In case you had Mexican food for lunch or something. Some of these sounds, again, you've got to use a stethoscope to help amplify it. Some you can use your naked ear. but it is creepy if your doctor doesn't use their stethoscopes, right?
So,
They're like, come here. No, what the heck? So we use this stethoscope because it's nicer that way. It has a little bit of distance between the patient and the doctor or your nurse. And of course, some of them are even quieter, so you have to use a Doppler to pick them up. So they bring out the little Doppler machine to amplify those sounds so we can pick them up. So we have 4 different heart sounds that we listen to. The first heart sound is called the first heart sound. Good news, they're all called 1, 2, 3, 4. So, yeah. So this is your lub. So if you can feel the lub tonight. Occurs at the beginning of ventricular systole. So when the ventricles start to contract, you're going to hear the lub sound. Now the lub is low in frequency. It's why it's pronounced as lub. Very, very white kind of thing. Look them up, kids. All right, so the lub is produced by 3 different things going on at the same time, which is why it tends to be a bigger heart sound and a longer heart sound compared to the other guys. So 1, vibrations of the AV valves during and after closure, right? When you slam a door, you can hear it. That's how you know people are in your driveway. It's like, I heard doors. Okay. Same thing happens here. When your tricuspid and your bicuspid valves slam shut, that's going to vibrate and you're going to hear that. And they're going to slam shut right before the ventricles contract. So this is the one they listen to see if you have AV valve problems. We also have the turbulence of blood as it's ejected through those arterial openings into the pulmonary trunk or to the aorta. Again, it's just like when you first turn water on when you're filling a bathtub, you can hear the water hit the sides of the bathtub, and after a while you can't hear the water anymore, or it's not as noticeable or loud. Look at that. Next time when you take a bath, listen to the water. Okay? It's louder when the bathtub's empty compared to when it's full, okay? Because we're hitting those empty vessels. And then the vibrations of the ventricle. The ventricles are so strong, so big, they do have a low hum to them when they vibrate, kind of like an engine would. So all those together give you that lub sound. The second heart sound, the dub or the dub, so it used to just be lub dub, but the second heart sound has a slightly higher pitch than the first heart sound. So they changed the name of it because dub sounds deep just like lub does. So they changed it to dub because P's have a higher sound than B sounds. So in case that freaks you out, because some will say lub dub still, some will say lub dub. They want to up because it's a higher pitch. Okay? So it is also shorter because it's not 3 things going on at once. It's just representing 1 thing going on at once. It happens at the end of ventricular systole or beginning of ventricular diastole. It depends on your text how they name it. It's kind of like 5 o'clock Friday, right? 5 o'clock is the end of the work week and the beginning of the weekend. It's the exact same moment in time. So the end of ventricular systole, that'd be like 5 o'clock at the end of your work week. The beginning of ventricular diastole, that would be 5 o'clock, the beginning of the weekend. So some books take it from the week point of view, some take it from the weekend point of view. Okay? So either one of them is acceptable and used as a descriptive term. So it begins when we stop contracting. What happens when the ventricles stop contracting? They stop pushing blood out and the semilunar valves can close. The aortic semilunar valve, the pulmonary semilunar valve will close down, and that's the slamming there. And this is why the first and second heart sounds are very easy to hear because they're door slamming. They're the valves slamming. So either the AV valves are slamming with your first heart sound or your semilunar valves are slamming with the second heart sound. So that's why you can hear them even without a stethoscope because door slamming is very, very loud. These 2, the third and the fourth, again, oftentimes you have to have amplification of some sort. You've got to have a Doppler, you've got to have special equipment because they're very quiet. Okay? One of them you typically only hear in children. So if you're going to be a pediatrician, a pediatric nurse, you're going to be very accustomed to hearing a third heart sound. If you work with old people, good luck, you're never going to hear the third heart sound. So your third heart sound occurs during or after ventricular contraction. I know that's kind of vague. It's like, so it may or may not be contracting. It's like a lawyer wrote that one. So it's due to tensing of the ventricular walls as they fill with blood. Again, you've got the ventricle having the blood hit the side of the ventricle and they tense. And we can pick that up as a sound, just like we hear the water hitting the side of a bathtub. Now, this is very common in children and adolescents because children's hearts are tighter, are firmer than adult hearts because they're newer, right? As you get older, you get saggier. And it's true for every part of your body, including your heart. So if you're in your 40s and 50s, your heart is saggier than it was in your teens. So you don't hear the hum because there's nothing tight to hit against. It's just like if you are around a drum, the tighter the drum, the louder the noise is when you hit it. If you loosen up the drum head, it doesn't make a lot of noise. So that's what's happening here. So again, if you're going to be a pediatric nurse, a pediatrician, you would be accustomed to hearing and listening for that third heart sound. If you're over 30, maybe with a Doppler, you might hear it. But for the rest of us, mourn your third heart sound, rest in peace, third heart sound. Because you're just not tight anymore. Sorry, it happens. And then your fourth heart sound. This is atria. So we've got valves, we've got ventricle, now we've got an atria. Now atria are much smaller than ventricles. Atria did not have as much muscle as ventricles, so they're not going to have as big of a oomph as ventricles. So we don't hear them as much. They're very quiet. So it occurs during atrial contraction, that little right before the first heart sound. So the muscle contractions of the atria. Now the numbering of the heart sounds, 1, 2, 3, 4, are numbered how they were discovered. First and second were discovered first. Once we got Dopplers, we heard the third, which isn't actually during the third one. It's actually between 1 and 2. And then your fourth is actually right before 1. So they're not in numerical order. They're discovery order. You actually have them go 4, 1, 3, 2. And again, 3 and 4. Okay. Murmurs. Abnormal heart sounds, right? It's just like when your kids talk behind your back. That's not what you want to hear, right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. You're like, say that to my face. And then they get older and they do, and you're like, I will take you out at the knees. Okay. My kids are bigger than me. My little one was like, you are small. And I'm like, shut up. Sweep the leg, right? All about the Karate Kid. Remember that? Sweep the knee. Look it up, kids. It started like a whole TV series. Remember when they all got old and then came back for more? I haven't actually watched it, but they're still there. All right, so abnormal. Don't want to hear it. Something's wrong. Complaints, that kind of scenario. So this is often due to regurgitation, backflow, and we all know backwash is bad. Right? So in this case, backwash in the heart chambers is going to be bad because the valves don't close properly. It's like how you know that you didn't close your car door good enough when you're on the highway and the wind whistles through it and you have to lock it and hope that it doesn't fall off during the wind. I know, paranoia on highways. Okay, that's what happens here. You get the whistling of that blood going through a valve that should be closed. And when it goes through a valve that should be closed, it whistles. It makes a noise, that murmur. So we can have a swishing sound because the valve does not close properly. That would be like the whistling on the highway, that swishing sound of air. This would be swishing sound of blood. Or we can have a screeching sound. So screeching is worse than swishies. This is when the valve is constricted. It's not as big as it should be. It's tighter than it should be, and we're still forcing the same amount of blood through it. So that can cause issues. It's like forcing yourself into pants that are too small. Not going to be comfortable, and it can cause problems. So we have two types of murmurs. We have a functional murmur and organic murmur. And again, just because it's organic doesn't mean it's good for you. In this case, it's not good for you. Functional murmur means that you're still functioning normal. It's just that your heart is working so hard, it doesn't have time to shut the doors. It's like when you run through the house and you kind of slam the door shut, but it opens back up. It's usually the refrigerator when your kids don't close it all the way. Close the refrigerator door. Somebody else has kids that don't close properly. Go back, tap it, it'll be fine, okay? So the screeching that we hear, the swishing that we hear is because the heart is pumping so fast, it doesn't have time to fully close the door before it starts the next round. So you get a little bit of backwash. Now, once you relax, once you stop exercising, you go back to normal, the murmur goes away. So it's only found during strenuous exercise. And this is why they tell you, you don't exercise too hard. If you can't talk while you're exercising, that's too much. If you don't have enough air to talk, you probably have your heart beating so fast that it can't shut all your doors properly. So you could be developing a functional murmur if you're having this problem. So keep the heart rate down a little bit. You're going to be able to shut the doors properly. Organic is a problem, an abnormality with one of the valves of the heart. So we can have a systolic or a diastolic. So a systolic murmur, you would hear the first heart sound, lub, then the shushing sound, and then the second heart sound, the duh. So this is blood flowing back into the atria through the ventricles. So your AV valves didn't close properly, because again, the first heart sound is when the AV valves close. If they don't close properly, you get the hit on the inside of the atria. So this would be something like a mitral valve murmur or a tricuspid valve murmur. Diastolic is at the end of the second heart sound, so lub, dub, shush. So that's, again, the second heart sound is when the semilunar valves are closing. So if we hear the noise after that second heart sound, that means the semilunar valves aren't closing properly. So we have the blood trickling back into the ventricles from either the aorta or the pulmonary trunk. So blood dropping back into the heart itself. This is also why if you've got a murmur, an organic murmur, you usually get a card that gets you out of PE. And that's because if you have an organic murmur, you already got backwash problems. If you exercise too strenuously, naturally you could develop a functional murmur even if your heart was completely normal. So if you already have an organic murmur and you go to exercise too much, that organic murmur will get bigger because it'll develop a functional murmur on top of the organic murmur. And then that could just blow out a valve. And we don't want blowouts in the heart itself. So that's why if you have a valvular disorder, again, you usually don't do strenuous exercise, you don't do sports, you don't have to go to PE class. Okay. This is where we listen to. We can't listen to the valve by putting the stethoscope directly on top of it because all the valves are really close together. So you would just hear all the doors slamming at once. So you kind of have to separate yourself so you can see where the echo is coming from. It's just like listening to somebody outside trying to figure out where they are. If you're too close, it's kind of hard to discern which direction you need to go. So if you want to listen to your mitral valve, you're going to tap by the apex. If you want to listen to your tricuspid valve, you're going to tap on the opposite side, on the lower part. So both of your AV valves are going to be to the lower portion of the heart that you would listen to. If you want to listen to the pulmonary semilunar valve, you do it up here at the base end. So both of the semilunars are on the base side. So you would do the left for the pulmonary, and you would listen to the right side for the aortic. So again, when you go to the doctor, they'll usually listen to your chest a couple of times in the front, and then they'll listen to your back. The back, they're listening to your lungs. So they can hear the lungs and any gurgling that might happen because of phlegm or mucus buildup without heart interruptions. And then if they want to listen to the heart, they'll go to the front of the chest. So that's why they do the back check and the front check. And again, if they suspect, they're going to listen a little bit longer. They're going to pay more attention at those 4 spots. If everything's going okay, they'll usually kind of do just like a down low and an up high. And then if they hear something a little suspect, they'll go specific to those locations they need to. Big Bad Harry questions? Coronary circulation, again, should also look familiar. So as mentioned, the heart cannot absorb enough oxygen and nutrients as the blood is going through its chambers to feed the muscle because the muscle is too thick. It has to have its own coronary circulation to drop off oxygen and nutrients, pick up waste and carbon dioxide. So that's our coronary circulation. Now to get into the coronary circulation, we have an opening called the sinus of Valsalva. So that is our entry point into this special circulation. And as mentioned, they're going to be sitting in those grooves. So the atrioventricular groove is where we'll have the major arteries, and then we have the interventricular grooves for the big branches in the front. Now this opening is right behind the aortic semilunar valve. So when the ventricle contracts, pushes the blood out, the semilunar valve opens wide. And that's going to block the opening to the sinus of Valsalva. Kind of like if you're hiding behind a door when somebody opens it and you just don't move. You can't move until they close the door. So what happens is when the ventricle relaxes, the not atrial, made up a word right there, aortic semilunar valve will close and blood will trickle off the back side of that valve into the sinus of Valsalva. So we will only enter into this circulatory system when the ventricles are relaxed. Everybody else, it's when the ventricles are contracting. So it's a little bit different that way. The reason for that is a safety mechanism. This hole is right as we're pushing blood out of the heart. It is experiencing the highest push, the highest pressure of blood that you're going to have in a vessel. We don't want that big pressure to come through this little opening because it'll blow out your coronary circulation. So we are going to close the door on it. We're going to block it with the aortic semilunar valve when we have that big push, that big pressure, and we're only going to trickle in when we've dropped pressure. So it's a safety mechanism so we don't blow out those little tiny blood vessels around the heart. Now, because we're getting blood directly from the heart, right after it leaves, we have the best oxygen and the best nutrients that we're going to be able to get. Again, if you're making dinner, you're not going to eat dinner while you're cooking it, but you're also not going to eat the piece that fell on the floor or got burnt. You're going to make sure you get the good one. And same thing here. We're going to eat the best oxygen, best nutrients. Now, as we look at it, again, highest oxygen content, all that kind of fun jazz, these blood vessels are going to have what are called anastomomes. Some people say anastomomes. I don't, because then to me it's like, oh, look at that, it's anastomomes with my homies. My brain just goes to weird gangster gnomes. I don't know why. Okay, it's the reason why this doesn't get out very often. So some will have the E pronounced and say anastomomes. Some will just say anastomomes. This is a fancy way of saying crisscrosses. Okay, so it's kind of like if you are on the highway and they have blocked off the Washington Street exit. Are you permanently prevented from getting off on Washington Street and coming to school?
Yeah.
Forever?
Not really, but
It depends. Do I want to go to school? Then I need an excuse. No, right? If they block off Washington Street exit, you just go to the next exit, turn around, and come back around. Or you get off at Georgia ahead of time and then come to it. We have alternate routes because I don't know. It's like I-40 keeps getting worked on forever. Okay, those are called anastomomes. So if we have a blockage, they'll oftentimes have a back door. So if you notice on that heart, this is why it was kind of annoying, like the posterior interventricular artery made a loop. You're like, why are you looping? It's an anastomome. It's a protection mechanism because we don't want to kill you if we have a blockage. So they'll usually crisscross and run into each other eventually. So we can still have blood delivery. Not as efficient, but we're still going to get blood to where it needs to go. Now the nutrients the heart needs, 60% of heart activity is fueled by fat because fat has your best nutrient source, which is why we store fat for the winter. We don't store sugar for the winter, right? Right. Your love handles are not made out of sugar, made out of delicious fat. Okay? So the next time someone goes, I want a heart healthy diet. That's why I eat high protein. Your heart's like giving you a really nasty emoji. That's what your heart's doing. 35% is carbohydrates, 5% is protein. Protein is very rarely used for energy in your body. Again, in the metabolism chapter that we'll get to by test 4, your book likes to use the quote, using protein for energy is like burning the walls of your house to stay warm. It works until you don't have a house anymore. We use protein to build things. We don't use it for energy. So anytime you have one of those health gurus, protein gives you energy, you're an idiot. Right? Unfortunately, again, if you're a personal trainer or a dietitian, you don't actually have to take A&P, which I feel is very disturbing. That these people are telling you how to live your life, but they don't know about your body. It's messed up. Okay. Why would we not want to have most of our energy come from sugar? Why is the heart going to want to have most of its energy come from fat? Other than fat gives us more energy, more bang for your buck.
Sugar burns faster.
Not a fast thing. You get different storage, but why would we not want to use the sugar? I know we're having to remember A&P1. Who uses sugar for energy?
Oh.
The people who have, use it for butterfly as well.
You're getting closer to it. What tissue loves it some sugar?
Neural tissue?
Neural tissue. Brain cells, neurons only use sugar. They never use fat. They never use protein. They only use sugar for fuel, which is why whenever we get stressed or we get tired or we get cranky, we want sugar because our neurons need it. Now, if the heart used sugar for energy, what would happen if we had a stressful situation and we had to run for our lives and your heart and your brain both wanted high amounts of sugar? Someone's going to have to give it up, right? We don't want the brain to give it up because then you can't think about it your way out. You don't want the heart to give it up because then you can't run away. You're competing directly for each other for the same resource. So if you're the heart and you run on fat and you're the brain and you run on sugar, when you're stressed, when you're running for your life, they don't compete for energy. So your heart doesn't have to give up energy so the brain can work, and the brain doesn't have to give up energy for the heart can work. So they're going to have that division of labor. So they, okay, chest pain. So you can see here, we've got a blockage of that blood vessel, so we're not delivering blood to the front of the heart. And we're gonna be having that pain that is leading up to the heart attack. We haven't had it yet. Heart attack, a cardiac infarction, we have death of tissue. The chest pains happen because you're not getting enough oxygen, just like the side hurts when you run too much. Remember back in the day in PE class where they made you run and then you hurt?
Mhm.
So lactic acid buildup of the heart gives us the angina pectoris, the chest pain. So preceding the heart attack, not the actual heart attack. Okay, so there's our circulation. There's those anastomomies. So again, that crisscross. So if we have a blockage here, we could come in through the back doors because it's going to take longer to get there. But hopefully we won't die waiting for that blood to return. And there's the venous. So the great one, the middle one going to the coronary sinus, and this small right there in the anterior right there.
So the venous system refers only to that section of the heart?
The veins returning back.
Okay. Gotcha.
So here's showing you a real picture, and you can see this narrowing. That means there's a chunk of fat in that blood vessel. So this patient is probably experiencing angina pectoris, chest pains, not to the point that they're dead yet because they still have blood flowing to that area, but not as enough blood. So we have that lactic acid buildup causing that pain and soreness. So this is what a blood vessel should look like. Nice and empty and open. Here's what it looks like. Again, you've got those arterial plaques. So we've reduced the space of that vessel so less blood can get to where it needs to go. So we end up suffering from oxygen deficiency. So it hurts. So the angina pectoris. Okay. And that's what it really looks like in a dissected blood vessel. See it sitting there. I'm gonna guess you guys are super excited about blood vessels because everyone's all packed it up. They want to leave me or something. All right. We'll talk about the nerves that help balance the heart tomorrow. And then we'll continue forward on our educational journey.